Okay, John, I'm going to spend a few minutes just asking you questions about your childhood, some of your early years. I know that you were born in 1920 in September in Lorain, Wisconsin, and your family moved when you were like 3 months old.
Right.
So why did they move to St. Clair?
Well, my folks bought a farm, had no buildings on it, and just a windmill is all that was on this farm, 80 acres. And so Dad had bought it, but then he had a lumber mill in Wisconsin. So he cut the trees, sawed the lumber, and had it shipped to St. Clair that built all of the buildings on the farm.
Okay, so I mean, they wanted to go from Wisconsin to St. Clair?
Yes. They wanted to. There was quite a lot of our relatives, both my mother's side and my dad's, lived in that area.
Okay. So that was a big factor, was the whole family piece?
I think so.
The connection?
Yeah, they wanted to get in with the rest of the relatives, and they had a hard time in Wisconsin. They weren't doing very well. They was living in a log cabin.
Which is where you were born?
Yeah, that's where I was born. And there was a couple of outbuildings, but it was very crude.
Okay. So, what kind of farm was it? Once they got to St. Clair, was it?
It had 80 acres that Dad bought, and it wasn't a very productive farm. There was probably 15 acres of it that was lowland that we called a slough that you couldn't raise crops on.
Oh.
And so there probably out of the 80 acres, there was probably 60, 65 acres of productive land.
So were they growing corn or grain or?
We raised corn, and we raised, one year we raised flax. And so that was to sell. But we found out that all the grain we could raise on the farm, the livestock took care of it all. We had very little that we could sell on the market.
Okay.
And one year we raised sugar beets.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting because we had to go out and work and keep the weeds out of that. And you see the farmers out here that are working in the field, you're bending over, yeah, and you're weeding out between the plants, and so, but us kids did that, so.
Did you grow any crops that you consumed as a family? Obviously, well, corn, but did you grow
Well, we had corn, and then we called it succotash. It was a mixture of oats and wheat and barley.
Okay.
And of course that made good feed for the stock, the pigs and the cows and the horses, whatever, chickens. So we didn't have to buy any commercial food, and of course back then commercial grain was almost unheard of. And we did have we call it a bird mill. It was a grinder that we could grind up the corn and grind up the grain, and so we did have that, so we could grind our own grain up for food.
Okay.
In fact, the corn, we would chuck that and run it through the mill, and that was our cornmeal for Johnny cake every morning.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
What are some of your earliest memories of the farm? What kind of chores did you do as a kid?
Well, now evidently my dad, before I and my mother or the rest of the family moved down, he came down and he built the house. Okay. And so the house was already built, the very earliest memory I can remember, but I remember them building the barn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
The family, or just the family, or did they bring people in, or?
well, my Uncle Charlie, which was in the First World War, and he he was in the cavalry, and he got out, and then he moved in with the folks, and he helped a lot through the building.
Okay. What kind of chores did you do when you were a kid?
Well, of course, as we grew up, well, I don't know what age, but the first thing that I can remember, the chores that we had to do was carry water, and because we had no electricity, no running water, it was just a pump, a windmill.
Okay.
And so it would be to gather the cobs from the hog barn because we would feed them whole cobs, corn, and they would eat the corn off and the cobs. And so we would have to gather them and bring them in for the stove. Then also to find wood, because there was a sort of a grove behind the house. And so we would go out there and get those small limbs and chop them up. And
This is for the stove in the kitchen, in the
yeah,
house.
that was the stove in the kitchen.
And you also burn the cobs. Is that right? Is that
Yeah, cobs made a very hot, fast fire. So in the morning, then Mom would have to get up and start the cook stove. And because we would get up, that was later when I was able to do the chores, and so the milking. So we get up and do the milking, and Mom would prepare breakfast.
Okay.
And so,
Okay.
and then of course you'd milk the cows. We had probably 10 cows that we'd milk. My brother and I would milk them. There was 2 of us. And then, so then we would have to separate the milk for the cream. So we'd have to run it through the separator, and
Okay.
then the skim milk, we called it, we'd feed the hogs. And then at calving time, when the cows first got freshened with calves, then we would have to feed the calves until they got large enough to sell for veal.
Okay. When do you remember when electricity got to the farm? I mean, was there one day or one month where all of a sudden it wasn't there and then it was there and
The farm, well, I kind of remember it as it progressed, as the things were built, because he built the house first, then he built the barn, then he built a chicken coop, then a hog house, and then a corn crib. So that was there was a shed beside the house that the wash machine was in, and the tool shop for tools.
okay. So electricity kind of came in phases over time as
Yeah, now from the time I can first remember until I started doing chores, I was probably 8, 9 years old.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So between that time, it's vague as to what all took place.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know of doing the building and activities, but I couldn't.
Yeah, that's fine. Tell me about going to school. I assume you started school when you were 6 years old, and
Yeah, I started when I was 6, and well, that's another story, because when I started school, Dad rented a farm from the banker, which was about, it must have been 5 or 6 miles from our place, and my Uncle Charlie then farmed our farm, and we moved to this farm that he rented, and so I started school from there. And so it was a team and wagon that they came to pick us up in, because they picked us up and took us to school. And so then for 4 years I attended the school in St. Clair, which was a larger school.
okay.
Then Dad, I don't know whether the owner didn't rent it anymore, Dad didn't want to, I don't know, but he moved back then to the regular farm and took over again.
And that was a much smaller school, I assume, back on the regular farm? Did you go to?
Yeah, and then, well, that was a one-room schoolhouse, all 8 grades, one teacher teaching all 8 grades. And it was 1.5 miles, so we walked rain or shine, winter or summer,
Right.
but we did have 3 months of summer off.
Right. So how big was the school back in St.
In St. Clair,
Clair? Was it?
that had a high school. That was full school. It had rooms with each, I wouldn't say each grade, but individual grades, and a high school included.
Okay.
So that was a
Pretty
large
big
school.
Okay. Okay. So when you got back to the smaller school, I assume you were with the same kids more or less all the time.
No, that was all new kids. But you didn't have to get acquainted with many because there was only about 12 or 15 kids in the whole school.
Right. Right. I mean, they were the same kids year in and year out. I mean,
Yeah,
some
you
kids
grew up with them,
graduated, but
went through all those grades.
Okay. Okay. So you went to school up through what, the 8th grade? Or-
The 8th grade.
Okay.
So,
What made that determination as to the 8th grade versus?
well, that's what the school
Okay.
offered, is the 8th grade, to the 8th grade.
Okay.
And the high school was 5 miles away in St. Clair.
Okay.
So when I graduated from 8th grade, which I was 14, then I went to work then on the farm, so I was a regular hand on the farm, and some of the older kids had, of course, moved away by then. The older kids, they all moved out, and the younger ones kept multiplying.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Did any of your other siblings go on to high school? Did the girls go to high school?
Yeah, they did. My sister Alma,